I want to start with something honest. Most men who come to me have been in relationships for years, sometimes decades. They are not careless men. They are not selfish men. They genuinely want their partner to feel good, to feel satisfied, to feel like her experience matters as much as his does. And most of them, when we sit down and actually talk about what happens in their intimate lives, share the same quiet confusion. She seems fine. She says things are good, but something feels like it's missing, and neither of them has the language for what that something is. The answer, almost every time, comes down to the same thing: information. Specifically, the information that nobody ever gave them about how her body actually works. Not the cultural version, not the one built on assumption and film and locker room conversation. The actual anatomical, neurological, clinical version. That version is what I'm here to give you today. By the time this conversation is over, you will understand more about female arousal and female satisfaction than most men learn in a lifetime. Not because this information is secret or rare, because it has simply never been delivered to you clearly, honestly, and without embarrassment. Let's begin. The gap nobody talks about. There is a statistic that I share with every man I work with because I find that hearing it as a number rather than a vague impression changes something. Research drawing on data from tens of thousands of adults found that heterosexual women reported orgasming during sex approximately 65% of the time. For heterosexual men, that number was 95%, 30 percentage points. Consistently, across multiple studies, multiple cultures, multiple age groups. I want to be very precise about what this gap means. It does not mean women's bodies are less capable of pleasure. It does not reflect a difference in desire or responsiveness. Women's bodies are extraordinarily capable of intense, sustained, deeply satisfying sexual experience. What the gap reflects is a mismatch between the approach most men use and the approach that actually works for most women's anatomy. That is an information problem. And information problems, unlike talent problems or desire problems, can be solved. Everything I am sharing today is aimed at closing that gap for you and for her. What her body actually is, the anatomy. Most men were never taught. Let me talk about anatomy because this is where everything else begins. Most men have a mental image of the clitoris as a small external structure at the top of the vulva, a sensitive button. And they are not wrong about the external portion, but they are missing approximately 90% of the picture. In 1998, groundbreaking anatomical research mapped the complete internal structure of the clitoris for the first time. What that research found, and what subsequent work confirmed and expanded, fundamentally changed everything about how female arousal should be understood. The clitoris is not a small external structure. It is an extensive internal organ, averaging roughly 10 centimeters in total length. It has two internal legs that extend backward on either side of the vaginal opening. It has masses of erectile tissue, the vestibular bulbs, that wrap around the vaginal canal on both sides. The visible external tip is simply the visible end of a much larger structure. When a woman becomes aroused, the entire structure fills with blood. Every part of it, internal and external simultaneously. And this internal engorgement is what creates lubrication, what heightens sensitivity throughout the entire pelvic region, and what makes the difference between an experience that feels profound and one that feels merely mechanical. Why does this matter for how you approach intimacy? Because the internal portions of this structure surround the vaginal canal. When penetration occurs in a fully aroused body at the correct angle and depth, it stimulates the internal portions of this structure through the vaginal wall. That is the anatomical explanation for what women describe as deep internal sensation during penetration. But here is the clinical truth that follows from this anatomy. The primary concentration of nerve endings in this entire structure is at the external tip. And penetration, by its mechanical nature, does not reliably contact that external concentration, which means that for the majority of women, penetration alone is insufficient to produce orgasm, not because something is wrong with her, but because the anatomy simply does not align that way. Understanding this is not discouraging, it is liberating. It frees both of you from an approach that was never anatomically designed to work as promised, and opens the door to one that actually does. The numbers on penetration. What the research actually shows. Let me be direct about something most men have never heard stated plainly. Research synthesizing findings across multiple studies found that only approximately 18% of women reliably achieve orgasm through penetration alone. Around 36% require clitoral stimulation alongside penetration. And a significant further percentage report that direct clitoral stimulation without penetration is their most reliable and satisfying path to orgasm. 1 in 5 women consistently orgasm from penetration alone. For the other 4 out of 5, clitoral stimulation is either essential alongside penetration or is the primary mechanism entirely. These findings have been replicated consistently across decades of research. This is not a niche finding or an edge case. It is the central documented reality of female sexual response. And yet the cultural narrative, the one embedded in how sex is depicted and discussed almost everywhere, presents penetration as the culmination and definition of sex itself. The men who understand this and adapt their approach accordingly are the men whose partners experience genuine, consistent satisfaction, not because they are more skilled by some innate measure, but because they are working with accurate information about how her body actually functions. The emotional foundation, why feeling safe is not separate from technique. Before I go any further into physical approaches, I need to establish something more important than any specific technique I will share today. Psychological safety and genuine emotional connection are not additions to female arousal. They are prerequisites for it. This is not relationship advice dressed up as clinical wisdom. This is neuroscience. Research on female sexual response established something that fundamentally distinguishes female arousal from the more linear model that most people are familiar with. For many women, desire does not precede arousal. It emerges from the right conditions being present. The mechanism is cortisol. The primary stress hormone directly suppresses the neurological and vascular processes that female arousal requires. When a woman is stressed, anxious, emotionally guarded, or feeling pressured in any way, her cortisol levels are elevated. And elevated cortisol creates a physiological environment in which genuine arousal is significantly impaired, regardless of how technically skilled the physical approach might be. This means that how she feels in the hour before you are intimate matters. The quality of your presence throughout the day matters. Whether she feels genuinely desired or merely available matters. Whether she senses patience or urgency matters. For women in their 40s and 50s, this psychological dimension often becomes more rather than less significant. The physical changes of this stage of life, the shifts in hormone levels, the changes in how quickly arousal builds, the heightened body awareness that accompanies aging, mean that emotional safety and feeling genuinely, specifically desired by you as she actually is, not as she was 10 years ago, carries more weight than it may have in earlier decades. When you approach your partner with authentic presence, with genuine attentiveness to her experience rather than to an outcome, her nervous system shifts, cortisol recedes, the pathways of arousal open, and from that open, receptive state, everything physical that follows is more effective, more deeply felt, and more likely to take her where you both want her to go. Emotional presence is not the warm-up to technique. It is the condition that makes technique work. Building arousal, what the body actually needs first. The word foreplay is part of the problem. It implies something preliminary, something before the real event, a prelude. For most women, what gets called foreplay is not preliminary. It is essential. Its duration and quality are among the strongest predictors of whether she will reach orgasm and how deeply satisfying the entire experience will be. Here is the physiological reason. Female arousal depends on a process of engorgement, blood flowing into the entire clitoral complex, the vaginal walls, and the surrounding tissue. This process takes time, and it cannot be rushed without consequence. Research suggests that many women require 15 to 20 minutes or more of non-genital arousal, kissing, touching, full-body contact, verbal intimacy, before genital stimulation feels truly pleasurable rather than merely mechanical or uncomfortable. For women over 50, hormonal changes mean this process typically requires more time rather than less. Natural lubrication may take longer to develop or may require supplementation. The pathway to full arousal is slower, not because desire is less, but because the body requires more patient attention to reach the state that makes everything else feel as good as it's capable of feeling. What does this look like in practice? It means treating the entire body as the site of arousal, not just the genitals. It means hands that move with genuine curiosity across her neck, her back, her inner arms, her thighs. It means kissing that is slow and present, not perfunctory. It means words, genuine and specific, about what you find desirable about her, about how she feels, about your actual experience of being with her. The investment of this time is not patience as sacrifice. It is the most effective technique available to you. The man who spends 20 genuine minutes building full-body arousal creates conditions in which every subsequent approach lands with extraordinary effectiveness. The man who spends 2 minutes creates conditions in which the same approaches feel premature and often uncomfortable. Clitoral stimulation. What the research says actually works. Research on female orgasm consistently identifies oral and manual clitoral stimulation as the approaches most reliably associated with female orgasm, more consistently than any other single physical technique. So what does effective stimulation actually look like based on clinical documentation? The most common error is approaching the clitoris directly and immediately. The external tip, early in arousal, can be uncomfortably oversensitive. Direct contact before the surrounding tissue is adequately engorged can produce a reaction that closes rather than opens arousal. The effective approach begins with the surrounding tissue, the inner thighs, the outer labia, the perineum. Gentle exploratory contact that increases blood flow and sensitivity in the entire pelvic region before the clitoral area itself is approached. When the clitoral area is approached, initial contact should be indirect, stimulating the internal shaft through the protective tissue above the external tip rather than directly on it. This produces arousal without the overstimulation that premature direct contact causes. As arousal builds, as her breathing deepens, as her body responds, stimulation can gradually become more direct and more focused. For manual technique, research and clinical documentation identify lateral stimulation as significantly more effective than conventional vertical stimulation for many women. Where conventional technique tends to apply pressure along the vertical axis, lateral technique applies rhythmic pressure across the horizontal axis of the clitoral shaft. Clinical documentation consistently associates this approach with faster arousal progression and more intense orgasmic experience. The anatomical reason is that lateral pressure distributes stimulation across a broader portion of the internal structure simultaneously, engaging more of the system rather than focusing on a single line. For combined stimulation, research identifies simultaneous internal and external stimulation as producing the most complete and most satisfying orgasmic experience for the majority of women. The anterior vaginal wall, approximately 5 to 8 centimeters inside on the upper surface, provides access to the internal portion of the clitoral complex through the vaginal wall. Gentle upward curved pressure on this area, combined with sustained external clitoral stimulation, engages the entire structure from 2 directions simultaneously. The result is what research documents as the fullest and most intensely satisfying orgasmic experience available. This requires adequate arousal before internal stimulation begins. The anterior wall is not particularly responsive until genuine engorgement has occurred. Attempting internal stimulation before this point is both ineffective and often uncomfortable. The single most important principle: consistency. I want to give this its own section because it is, in my clinical experience, the most commonly made and most consistently damaging error in the final approach to female orgasm. The error is change. The neurological process of building toward orgasm is cumulative and progressive. It depends on the continued, uninterrupted delivery of the same stimulation pattern. When that pattern changes, even slightly, even with good intentions, the build does not simply pause and resume. In many cases, it partially or completely resets. The woman who was approaching orgasm finds herself back at a significantly lower level of arousal, having to rebuild from a point that feels frustratingly far from where she was. The man who changed his approach out of enthusiasm or the misguided belief that variety is always better cannot understand why the response he was receiving has shifted. This dynamic is one of the most common sources of sexual frustration in long-term relationships. Not the absence of technique, the presence of change at exactly the wrong moment. In practice, this means paying close attention to her responses as arousal builds, identifying the specific pressure, pace, rhythm, and location that produces escalating response. And once that escalating response is clearly established, making a conscious decision to maintain exactly that approach without variation. When things are genuinely working, the most powerful thing you can do is stay the course. Do not speed up. Do not vary the pressure. Do not introduce novelty. Simply continue exactly what is working until she is fully through. Consistency at the right moment is not monotony. For her arousal system, it is the precise condition that orgasm requires. Communication. The most underused tool. One of the most consistently documented findings in female sexual satisfaction research is also the most consistently avoided in practice. Real-time communication during intimacy is among the strongest predictors of female satisfaction. More predictive than frequency, more predictive than duration, more predictive than almost any specific physical technique. And yet most couples do not communicate explicitly during intimacy. Research identifies the primary barrier as the discomfort many men feel with asking, rooted in the cultural equation of sexual competence with instinctive knowledge. The belief that a skilled man already knows. That asking breaks something. This belief is not just wrong. It actively prevents both partners from having the experience they're capable of having. Your partner's arousal is not a fixed system with a reliable map. It changes with her mood, her energy, her physical state, the emotional texture of what has happened between you that day. What worked beautifully last week may need adjustment tonight. What she needs right now is not necessarily what she needed the last time. No amount of knowledge is a substitute for knowing what she needs in this specific moment. And the only way to know that is to ask. Not awkwardly, not apologetically, simply warmly as a genuine expression of interest in her experience. Does this feel good? What feels best right now? Can I try something differently? These questions do not break the experience. For most women, they deepen it, because they communicate something that matters as much as any technique, that her experience is what you are actually here for, not a performance, not an outcome. her. When she feels that, genuinely, her nervous system responds in ways that no technical skill can replicate. Bringing it together. Everything I have shared today comes back to one integrated understanding. Her body has a specific anatomy, a specific arousal sequence, and specific physical and psychological conditions under which the most satisfying experience becomes possible. None of these requirements are mysterious or complicated. They are simply accurate information that most men were never given. The anatomy is real. The internal structure of her arousal system is extensive and requires a different approach than penetration alone provides. The arousal sequence is real. Her body requires time and patient, attentive stimulation to reach the physiological state in which genital stimulation is most effective. The psychological foundation is real. Her emotional experience of being with you shapes her neurochemical state in ways that directly determine how her body responds. The consistency principle is real. The final approach to orgasm requires sustained, unvaried stimulation, not novelty or escalation. And communication is real. The most reliably satisfying encounters are the ones where both of you are actually telling each other what is working. The man who understands all of this and brings that understanding into his intimate relationship is not performing a series of techniques. He is genuinely present with another person in the most intimate experience two people can share. He is attending to her actual experience rather than to a projected idea of it. That quality of genuine attention, grounded in real knowledge and expressed through real presence, is what produces the kind of intimacy that deepens over time rather than fading. And it is available to you starting right now with what you now know.